Hello, my name is John Carr, and welcome to our online dialogue on the global dimensions of the coronavirus crisis. We're delighted you're with us. We have more than 1,000 people signed up to join us. And we have a wonderful, remarkable group of leaders to help us examine this topic. I want to thank you, our friends, for joining us on YouTube. I encourage you to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag CST coronavirus and by tagging the initiative at GU Public Life on Twitter. You can submit questions at CATH social thought at georgetown.edu. And with that, I'm going to proceed. We're going to discuss a terrible topic with some really remarkable leaders. We're going to focus on the global dimensions of this. This is our fifth dialogue on this. We focus on the health dimensions, on the economic dimensions, on the challenges for young people, and on the vision of Pope Francis. In this case, we want to lift our sights from the challenges we face here in the United States and ask, what are the global dimensions of this crisis? What are the health consequences? What are the economic costs for people not a part of our own nation? And what are the responsibilities of the United States? And what is Pope Francis calling us to do at this time of crisis and testing? For many of us, this has been a very long Lent. It seems, frankly, to be an endless Lent. But at Easter, Pope Francis said, this is not a time for indifference because the whole world is suffering. It needs to be united in facing the pandemic. May the risen Jesus give hope to the poor, to those living on the peripheries, to refugees and the homeless. May these, the most vulnerable of our brothers and sisters living in the cities and peripheries of every part of the world, not be abandoned. We are honored to have with us from the Vatican, Cardinal Peter Turkson, who has been asked by Pope Francis to be a part, to actually lead a commission on this topic for the entire church. Haiti Diaz, who is joining us from Uganda, who is the CRS director and is working with refugees and with people in Africa, and Reverend David Beckman, the president of Bread for the World. Pope Francis, in that Easter message, in his remarkable moment of standing alone in St. Peter's, has called us to solidarity in the midst of crisis and to creativity in the midst of testing. I have to be honest, I don't feel much solidarity these days. I'm focused very much on my own family, my own community, what's happening to our initiative, what's happening to Georgetown. Frankly, I was having trouble sleeping last night. I tried the Serenity Prayer, and that didn't work very well. And I don't know whether it was anticipation of this gathering or frustration. And then I stepped back and I thought, I'm really tired of working at home. But there are lots of people around the world who have no work and some who have no home. There are people, I'm frankly frustrated with social distancing. I can only imagine the impossibility of social distancing if you are in fact in a refugee camp in the Middle East or Africa. I worry whether we have good Wi-Fi for this dialogue. But some people have no water. That's their priority. And there's a lot of talk on the news about shortages of meats. And we went through a whole period of hoarding toilet paper. Many people can't feed their families. So for me and for others, this is the time to step back from our own concerns, from our focus on our own nation, and ask ourselves, what does wisdom require? What does good policy require? Frankly, what does our faith require? And to begin that conversation, I want to turn to Cardinal Peter Turkson. Thank you very much, Cardinal, for being with us.
Thank you.
I think many of you know Cardinal Turkson is the head of the dicastery for promoting authentic human development. He was asked, as I said, by Pope Francis to lead a new commission on COVID-19. He can maybe tell us something about that. He's a native of Ghana. He was an archbishop. He, frankly, is a key ally and close confidant of Pope Francis, and for many of us, is a great example of how to share Catholic social teaching and call us to greater solidarity. So welcome, Cardinal Turkson. I know you have many other commitments. What is the message of Pope Francis, and what should be the work of the Church, the Catholic community, as we face this monumental challenge? What is Pope Francis calling us to? How is he encouraging us? How is he challenging us?
Thanks, John, and good morning, good afternoon. So thanks for the invitation to be part of this discussion group. What Pope Francis is telling us or inviting us to do, you have kind of summed it all up at the beginning, but I'll go through it all again. I think Pope Francis, especially the critical moment of the beginning of this, the high point here in Italy, and the celebration of the Holy Week and Easter, gave him the occasion and the opportunity to kind of dramatically enact the challenges of the pandemic that we're going through. The pandemic Peter's Basilica alone, a pastor without his flock, but having to address his flock through the media and all of that. But the biggest message he addressed to us on Easter morning in his message, central message, Ubi et Orbe. And as you say, it's a message that plays upon the symbolism of the Holy Week and especially the Easter. The Easter event began with the lighting of a candle in darkness. And that candle, and he said, we now also engulfed with the darkness of this pandemic. The darkness of this pandemic, which has caused a lot of sorrow, which has broken up families, taking away dear ones and all of that. But in the midst of this, there's this light of the risen Lord. And so the light of the risen Lord, which begins to now shine in the world, engulfed in this pandemic of darkness, then becomes a light which, according to the Holy Father, again using another imagery from the pandemic itself, begins to describe a new contagion or a new infection, as it were. It's not only the infection of the pandemic we're dealing with, but it talks about the values or the different images of the risen Christ. The first one, of course, is the message of hope. And when Pope Francis talks about hope, he kind of, goes back and roots his concept about hope in what Pope Benedict had said before in the Synod on Africa. There, Pope Francis has said that to talk about with divine life, to the point that he says, hope generates energy within us, hope stimulates the intellect and gives the will its power to act. So with this sense of hope, Pope Francis invites us then to go out to fashion, to rediscover solidarities. You had mentioned earlier on that at one point you felt difficult to feel, for other people. It's just you, your family, America, and all of that. But that's precisely what cannot be done in this period of crisis. Because this also leads us to discover that humanity is really not alone. Humanity is a family. It stands together or it destroys itself, torn apart. So that was the challenge Pope Francis addresses to us. He also invites us to look at the victory of love over hatred, love over evil, and therefore raises our gaze towards the possibility of overcoming this virus with research, with human endeavor, talent, and studies, and all of that. So there is hope, and there's a light of hope to be enkindled, as it were, in this period of crisis. Then he goes on to talk about the healing of wounds. And in this, he appreciates very much the role of doctors and nurses who put their lives on the line to save other people. And again, you see how that plays with the message of Easter. Jesus dies to give us life, and he likens that to the very many services that nurses and doctors are rendering all over the world, putting their own lives on the line so people can be saved. If you listen to the story of, Boris Johnson of Britain, he will tell you a lot about this. How two people devotedly stood by him and gave him liters and liters of oxygen and enabling him to come out of all of this. Then there is also the message to overcome certain negative tendencies. Pope Francis in this period is also been contacted by several heads of state for a lot of conversations. And in these conversations, the one thing that appears to be coming true is the disquiet, is the unease, almost the fear, anxiety that a lot of people have. Don't see where economies are going, don't see where jobs are going, and don't see how they can really get things out again. So with all of this, Pope Francis addresses us, but also challenges us to overcome the negativities that such situations tend to generate within us.
Thank you very much, Cardinal. That sets a powerful context for our discussion. So much of the commentary about the church in this crisis has been about the fact that we cannot gather for worship. Some people say the church is closed down, when in fact the church is mobilizing for action. We'll hear more about that from Heidi about what Catholic relief services are doing. One of the ways the church is mobilizing for action is the Holy Father has asked you to head a commission. Can you say just a word about that commission, what its mission is, what its work will be?
Okay. It's a long story, but I'll respond to it and say a word about it, okay? So I'll just make it a word, just one word, 2 words or something. During one of these usual, audiences we have with the Pope in the line of, work and business, in the midst of the Italian, huge figures rising about debts, we discussed the possibility of the Holy Father taking his intervention to another level. It already distributed a lot of face masks, ventilators, and respirators to several health institutions. And now the sight of hospitals and healthcare centers not being able to cope generated briefly the idea, can we probably not develop something in the Vatican, like something that Paul VI for, as a kind of field hospital or something. We did briefly think about that. And then the idea about the commission came up. Okay, then let's build a commission, not simply to think about what we can do immediately for the group dying here in Italy, but how we can be of help for the whole world. Commission. We wanted to call it COVID Response Action, and the Holy Father used the name Commission, so we went to Vatican Commission for COVID aid. It's made up of 5 working groups. The first group reaches out to the churches all around the world, okay, the different countries, to listen to their own story and their own strategies for dealing with this, and then find out how can the Vatican be of support. So idea is we do not go to replace them as actors in this situation. We go to strengthen them as actors in this COVID pandemic. Second group is a very serious group. It's a group of research, thinking, and action, analyzing everything that is happening in the areas of ecology, finance, economics, politics, and then security, to see how in the post-COVID world, different lines or different trajectories can be described along which we can begin to travel. And so not just go back to business as usual, that kind of thing. Then there's the third one in the area of communication. How can we help the Vatican communicate best in this period of pandemic? Then there's a fourth one which recognizes the Vatican as a state, sees how it can also place the Vatican on level with other states and international organizations for the purpose of advocacy, for example, against cancellation of debt, against basic universal salary, all of these things, to deal with other states about this and work with international organizations to promote new ideas and new action. The fifth one is about fundraising, the money we need to do all of this. So this is a commission that we set up, and it started working marvelously well already.
Thank you. We'll be talking about some of those tasks, advocacy, reaching out to the churches. We are very honored that Kim Daniels, our colleague at the initiative, is a part of that third group on communications, and other at Georgetown are trying to be of assistance to you. Hadi, you are really in some ways on the front lines of this. The Cardinal is looking at the Universal Church, working with Pope Francis to bring the principles of Catholic social teaching, our experience around the world, our institutions, our capacity. You are facing the realities on the ground. You're the program director of Catholic Relief Services in Uganda. You work with refugees coming in from South Sudan and the Congo, I believe. I was fascinated to learn you are a refugee yourself. You came from Cuba to the United States as a young girl and worked in Latin America, I believe Honduras and El Salvador. The Cardinal has talked about the large scope of solidarity. Can you talk about solidarity in action? How is CRS representing Catholics in the United States anticipating and working with those who will be affected by this pandemic?
Thank you, John. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, with David, and a huge honor to be on the same panel with Cardinal Turkson. So thank you for this opportunity, and greetings to everyone from Kampala. Uganda has done an excellent job of stopping the COVID-19 pandemic spread. We have 122 cases, over half of those cases have recovered, and that's fantastic because Uganda represents many countries in Africa that simply just don't have the resources to address a major outbreak. We have 300 ICU beds, we only have 55 ventilators in the entire country, and so we need to celebrate that, but at the same time, the largest challenge we're facing in Uganda is there's a lockdown. To stop the spread of COVID-19 and take the necessary precautions, the government instituted a complete lockdown as of March 30th. So for about the past 45 days, there has been no work. Almost all businesses are closed. There's no public transportation. There's no private transportation. We can't drive our cars. We can walk to the grocery store or we can walk to the pharmacy. And so what we're seeing here in Uganda and what CRS's priority has become is first supporting the stop of COVID-19, supporting that the spread does not continue in the country, but more importantly, to ensure that our at most risk beneficiaries are not driven into destitution because of this lockdown. This is a country where the vast majority of the population are either farmers or they're workers who earn $1 or $2 a day. People haven't been able to work for 45 days. So what we can see is in a country where food insecurity was already high, already 1/3 of children who were stunted due to malnourishment were already food insecure, we're seeing that those numbers are increasing. Families who literally earned their daily bread from $1 or $2 a day working as waitresses, cooks, taxi drivers, they are not working and not able to feed their families at home. We work in Karamoja with farmers who now is planting season. Now's the time to get ready to plant your crops so that you'll have a harvest and food for your family for the rest of the year. They don't have the inputs they need to be able to plant, which means they won't have food in the coming months. So we as CRS have been working really hard, first of all, to ensure that communities are aware of COVID-19. We have done a lot of work around raising awareness through radio, which is very important here in Uganda, but through other types of community messaging. We've donated hand washing stations and we've installed them in markets. We've installed them in trading stations, at health facilities, and we've also provided soap with them. Now, I know it may sound kind of an easy message to tell people to wash their hands, but as you mentioned earlier, we live in a reality where many people don't have water in their homes, and certainly they don't have money to buy soap. So our work to make sure that families and communities have soap, they have hand sanitizer, they have messaging about washing their hands is really critical. Additionally, we really are looking at our program participants, the most vulnerable. We work with over 133,000 children and families for HIV positive. We're worried that they will not have the food they need in the coming weeks, and so we're providing $27 of cash transfer to the most vulnerable families. I know $27 is not a lot of money in the US, but here in Uganda, it makes a difference between a family going hungry and a family being able to eat.
Thank you very much, Haiti. You talked about $27. It reminded me, because we were not able to go to our parish for Mass during Lent, Linda and I didn't do Operation Rice Bowl. And actually we did it, but we didn't turn in the money. And so my understanding is there actually is a way we could, each of us, provide help in providing that $27 or something like that. I think we can go online and send in our Operation Rice Bowl. What else should American Catholics be doing? It sounds remarkable. It sounds like you and others are taking the steps to mitigate the spread of the disease, but the consequences of that for ordinary life and families are just devastating. What should people on this call, what should American Catholics be doing to support your efforts besides sending in their rice bowl online?
Well, we certainly appreciate the support for CRS, but also for Catholic Charities, for the many Catholic organizations who are doing very good work at this time and the entire year. I think the most important thing that American Catholics can do is actually something that you mentioned at the very beginning, John. It's really easy at this time for us to turn inward. So many families have suffered loss. People are fearful. There's isolation in communities. And sometimes the instinct is to turn inward. But I feel as Catholics, we really are called to serve the most vulnerable. And the most important thing we can do as American Catholics at this time is be advocates, be the voice for the voiceless. And those are the very poor, vulnerable families, children here in Uganda and really throughout the world, who this pandemic is pushing them closer and closer to the brink of destitution. We at CRS are advocating that the U.S. government take a leadership role. We're expecting for that to be another piece of legislation that will look at supporting the world's poor and the world's need in the COVID-19 pandemic. And we would really like American Catholics to be the voice of the voiceless, be advocates for the poor, and push for U.S. leadership. I think that it's really important for everybody listening to understand that countries like Uganda, there is no safety net here. African countries, generally speaking, are not going to be able to provide unemployment checks or other types of safety nets for families. Even food distribution is something that governments have a very hard time doing. And so the world's poor families really need us. There's this wonderful man I know named Moses. He is a taxi driver. He's out of work. He has some sugarcane planted in front of his house. He lives in a very low-income neighborhood, and that sugarcane has been there for years. This weekend, Moses told me that slowly children have been coming to his house to ask him for the sugarcane. And so now, over the past 3 weeks, all the sugarcane is gone. So I innocently asked him, why do you think they want the sugarcane? And he told me to eat. For these families in his neighborhood, the juice from the sugarcane that these children are sucking on, that may be their only food the entire day. And so we as American Catholics, who are certainly having a very difficult time, we need to also look outward, and we need to really show our love. We are called by God to show our love to our neighbor. We are called by God to really show solidarity. And this is the perfect time, and we invite everyone to join us.
Thank you very much. I mean, the story of the sugarcane that's disappearing because it's the only meal kids have, that doesn't move us, what will? Both Cardinal Turkson and Haiti have talked about the importance of advocacy. And one of the groups that does an enormously powerful job of advocacy is Bread for the World. Reverend David Beckman as president of Bread for the World and the Alliance to End Hunger. You may not know, he's a Lutheran minister. He was an economist at the World Bank, and he won the World Food Prize. He's also a friend. David, after more than 25 years as president of Bread, is leaving that position. He'll continue to be a powerful voice for poor and hungry people. I've known David a long time. I now serve as chair of the board of Bread. I had the honor of being on the CRS board. I thought I knew what Bread did, and I thought what David did. I think David is one of the preeminent Christian leaders of our time because of the work he has done. And we have a wonderful new president, Eugene Cho. But I thought there's nobody better to talk about U.S. responsibilities at this moment. David, Bread works on hunger in the United States, and we have seen these pictures. Thousands of cars lined up to get a loaf of bread, some fruit, maybe some other food. Yet you also advocate for the poorest people in the poorest places on earth. What should American responsibilities be, not only to our own hungry, but to the hungry of the world?
Thank you. Contributing to Catholic Relief Service is a really good start. Haiti, what you told us about is just really striking. And then, as Haiti said, I think we also need to get the U.S. government to provide leadership in our own country. I wish we'd managed the COVID crisis as well as in the United States as they have in Uganda. But then we're the richest, most powerful nation in the world. We have responsibilities for leadership globally, and we are not providing, the United States is not providing leadership for a coordinated international response to the crisis. And I appreciate that the two parties have been able to work together to in the last weeks, pass really substantial COVID response legislation. But I think that the money that Congress has directed toward needs around the world, this is a global pandemic, I think it's roughly 0.1% of the money that they've approved for the COVID response. So, the way to change that is us. I really appreciate all the, it's great to be here with Cardinal Turkson. It's an honor. I appreciate the invitation. Haiti's remarks have been great. I also appreciate the people who are likely gathered in this webinar. And what we can do is, first, both CRS and Bread for the World and a number of other groups are pushing for $12 billion in international aid in the next COVID response bill. The congressional offices are answering their phones. We can call our 3 members of Congress and ask them for $12 billion in the next COVID response bill for international aid. They're not getting very many calls about international aid. And then I think also this is an election year. This is a chance for us all to get our government to provide better leadership. Our politics is deeply broken. And this election is an opportunity to fix that, but that takes, while we're all sheltered in our homes, we can use time and our influence and our money to get good candidates elected this fall. That's desperately important in Uganda, around the world, and also in our own country.
What would you say to those who say we ought to focus on the hungry at home, that we've never had a situation like this? So much of our progress, Bread and the Bishops' Conference and so many others, have worked to reduce poverty at home and around the world. But this is a time to focus on our own. Why the emphasis on refugees coming in from South Sudan, or people in Africa or Latin America or in the Middle East? Shouldn't this, at least for now, shouldn't we focus on the hunger and the poverty and the sick here at home?
Well, I think it's got to be both and. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And, there are national security reasons, economic reasons for doing that. It's long-term in our own interest to be a good part of the global community. But in this, my guess is almost everybody on this in this webinar is they're a bunch of good Catholics. And although I'm a Lutheran, my favorite book is Joy of the Gospel by Pope Francis. It's the letter that he wrote right after to the world. He wrote it not just to Catholics, but the rest of us too. And what he basically says is that the gospel of God's love in Jesus Christ gives us tremendous joy. And that joy moves us then to try to change the world, to make the whole world consistent, more consistent with the fact that God loves you and me and everybody. So that's just a powerful motivation to reach out to people who are in our own communities who are hungry, and also people in Kampala and all over Africa and around the world who are hungry.
Thank you, David. That was powerful. I'm just amazed. We're sitting here and we have the Pope's representative from the Vatican, somebody from Africa, and David, who's 5 miles away, and we got it to work, even though it freezes up every once in a while. Cardinal Turkson, we have a lot of questions that are coming in. Two are related, but different in some ways. One, a student, Andrew Condon, a student at Georgetown, talks about how much we miss the Eucharist. And isn't there a way we ought to be able to have, he suggests remote consecration. I don't think we should ask David about that, but how do we build up the body of Christ when we can't gather for worship? And then there's another question, which is, what can parishes do? What can local communities of faith, both now when we cannot gather and once we can, even with limitations? I'm sure your commission is thinking about, what do the local communities of faith, what can we do to carry out the Pope's call to solidarity and creativity?
Yeah, thanks. Since the challenge of the pandemic, COVID, to have us all stay home, not maintain social distances and all, several pastors have been very creative. And right at the beginning of this was to go back to remember my own, because I grew up in a mining town that didn't have a residential, a priest in residence, and so we had access to communion once every 2 months or something. In between, whenever we went to church on Sunday, the prayer we did was, in fact, did have people concentrate on the value of the Eucharist more than those who sometimes be able to receive it physically. So while it's impossible to have access to the Eucharist, the prayer of spiritual communion is something that we can, as it were, maintain and sustain ourselves with till it becomes possible to do this again. But the one thing, though, about the Catholic Church is that the church is represented, any local church is always represented, are not able to come together to worship. The priest is still able to celebrate the Eucharist alone. And in doing that, he celebrates the Eucharist with the community, thinking about them and having them all around him. So yes, physically they're not there, but when the priest celebrates the Eucharist every moment, in his local parish church or whatever, he celebrates that in spiritual communion with the whole congregation. So they may not be there physically, those who can watch it on TV or whatever, but as long as their pastor stands behind spiritual communion prayer.
Thank you, Cardinal. Hedi or David, you've already talked about some things that people at the parish level can do. Is there anything you want to add before I go on to another question?
I think we can reach out to people in our parishes. What I'm struck by in the church I attend, we're worshiping online together. We have coffee hour together. I think the people who get together, I'm really struck at the deep needs of many of the families in the church, and most of the conversation is about that. But the parish has made May a mission month. So It has long-term partnerships with churches in Uganda, an orphanage in Honduras, and so forth. And so during the month of May, after coffee hour, there's another 20 minutes to brief people in the parish on what's happening in Uganda, what's happening in Honduras, what Bread for the World is doing, and how they can be involved in all those ways. So I think within the parish, it's a way, the parish's message needs to be not only about the care of the people in the church, but about what we're doing in our community and what we're doing in the world. It's a powerful instrument to do that.
I wanted to add that one of the things that always strikes me when delegations come to Uganda, Catholics, whether they're students from universities or individuals from parishes, they are really, they remark how admirable our work is and how great our staff is and the sacrifices that we're making. And I think one thing that American Catholics sometimes really fail to realize is that those of us here in Uganda, or whether we're in Kenya or we're in Madagascar or the Philippines, we're in El Salvador, wherever we may be, we really just are an extension of the Catholic Church's solidarity. We really are an extension of every single American Catholic who wants to show their love for God through love for their neighbor, and not just their neighbor across the street or in the same city, but their neighbor across the world. I think at the beginning, Cardinal Turkson mentioned how the Pope is really calling us to say that humanity is not alone, that we are one family. And I always really try to share with American Catholics that I meet that my work here in Uganda and their contributions and their advocacy, their tireless and passionate advocacy for the poor of the world, it is inextricably linked. My work cannot be done without them, and it is something that American Catholics should be committed to and proud of, because they are making an incredible, incredible difference. And I just want to quickly give a little story. You know, when you work in the field, you always come across these amazing sisters. We're working right now with a Franciscan sister. Her name is Sister Margaret. She founded an organization for children who were orphans during the war, the conflict in northern Uganda. And she's grown this organization to be able to essentially provide employment for disabled individuals and for very vulnerable at-risk youth. And so Sister Margaret has been making school uniforms, but school here has been canceled. Nobody knows when it's going to happen again. So Sister Margaret came to CRS. We've partnered with her on other efforts, and she was concerned that these very vulnerable young people, very vulnerable individuals with disabilities would not be able to feed their families. That's the reality where we are. You don't work, you don't have food for your family. So we encouraged her. We encouraged her to take $500 in seed money that CRS had from private Catholic funding, funds that we've received from American Catholics, and we encouraged her to make face masks. We provided her with a little bit of marketing advice, where to market her face mask. That was 3 weeks ago. Sister Margaret has sold $2,500 of face masks in 3 weeks. She has 28 people employed, and they're not only providing for their family, they're providing for their extended family that is also at this time without work. And those are the contributions that American Catholics make. They make it possible for us in the timely, right moment when people most need help, for us to be able to partner with local organizations, to partner with the local Catholic Church in Uganda, and really bring their solidarity into action.
Pope Francis frequently talks about the everyday saints, or the saints next door, and those were great examples of them. David, I don't know if Catholics will stay on the line after worship to check in. I heard recently that Purgatory is going to be a Zoom meeting that never ends. So, on a more serious note, we have the gospel passage of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. I think right now we're called to recognize Jesus in those without bread, in our own community and around the world.
Right.
I have two questions about community. One from Sam Kimbrell. He says the historic record seems to indicate that pandemics often break up communal structures rather than fostering them. Do you have a sense on the international scale what features are likely to be most important with regarding to promote solidarity? So the temptation to pull apart in times of difficulty, how do we in fact pull together? And then a specific question about the U.S. is defunding the World Health Organization. How can church leaders respond to the lack of global solidarity and the lack of participation in international developments? So does this pandemic break us apart on the global scale, and specifically the World Health Organization, which is supposed to be a place where we come together? David or the Cardinal?
Cardinal Turkson.
Okay. Pandemics do not have to break us up. And pandemics do not have to, make each one go his own way. John, you started off this with us asking me about what the Pope's message, is. And one of the messages the Pope addresses all. But the Pope is saying that that's not really what this situation, invites us to be. Rather, the situation invites us, just as he's had a chance to speak about this several times in the past in Laudato Si, the situation invites us to come together, to put our minds and hearts and thoughts together to find a solution. We need a solution for this pandemic. And that solution may not come from a single brain or a single individual. This is the time to put together our resources, talents, and everything to find a solution. So the challenge before us is the tendency to be egoistic, to be nationalistic and all, but there is also the call rooted in our own human nature to live in relationships. Because the human person is essentially a relational being. And when it's not possible to live the relationality or the relational character of our beings, we feel torn apart. So this is what the Pope reminds us of. Let's not yield to this egoistic tendency. I know that when this broke here in Europe, and in some places it's still in force. For example, two weeks ago, an embassy donated, a carton of masks and protective garment that we wanted to ship to some place in Africa. And we thought the fastest way to do this was to do the DHL. We went to DHL in Italy, so Italian state, and we're told that there is a legislation preventing them from shipping anything of that nature out of Europe. I knew that Germany started with something like that and France followed. Okay, there was a legislation to stop people shipping things. They said that we need it all here locally for our own, patients. But happily, we could do it through the Vatican. So the Vatican is probably not part of.
Thank you. Two questions about Africa, maybe Hedi and maybe the Cardinal. What are the key issues that African countries are not facing in this pandemic, either alone or through the African Union? And then a specific question, is there a way to support some of the farmers and food producers in places like Uganda? Should that be an area of focus as well as to avoid food shortages? So what are the three major issues facing African countries? And specifically, is there a way to support farmers and food producers in Uganda and other parts of Africa? Why don't you lead off, Hedi?
Sure. I think that we absolutely see the great need to support farmers in Africa. Uganda is a country where 85% of people are farmers. Yet I think it's important to point out that even so, there isn't enough food in Uganda to really meet nutritional needs. We work with communities where over 85% of farmers say that they don't have enough food every day for their families, or that the food isn't sufficiently nutritious. So we work with the US government, we work with private foundations, we work with Catholic donors to ensure that farmers learn the types of practices and the types of approaches that not only will allow them to have a diversified diet, but also that will allow them to have kitchen gardens and to have other types of mechanisms to prevent the climate problems that they're having because of all the climate warming that we have in the world today. And so one of the things that we've really found is working with mothers to help them have kitchen gardens that allow them to grow crops that provide nutrition for their family, working with farmers to have more climate smart practices that enrich their soil, that allow them to take better care of the water in their communities. And these are programs that CRS has, these are programs that many other organizations have, and it is critically important to support them.
I think the support for agriculture is just crucial, and it's going to continue. It's not just the shutdown that attacks agriculture. You know, the people having to stay at home. It's also it makes it hard to get to their fields. But then the global economy is in deep recession, and so that means that Ugandan farmers who export coffee will have a real dramatic slump in their demand. The other thing that's happening to agriculture around the world is also what Haiti mentioned about the disruption of planting seasons and disruption of trucking, the disruption of international shipping. A lot of people in Africa, especially people who are really severely hungry, depend on food aid from much of it financed by the U.S. And just the logistics of getting that to people in remote areas are going to be difficult. So investing in agriculture, helping farmers and countries adjust to these new realities and continue to feed the people is really important. I think one thing I was struck by just in thinking about this panel and getting ready for it was that quite a few of the African countries and other low-income countries are still at the early stages of the famine. So an early priority for the whole world is helping those countries put good public health systems in place, you know, the radio, all that, you know, but not just CRS, the whole nation needs to be mobilized by the government and lots of NGOs to do the public health things that can keep the virus from spreading. If these countries can keep the virus from spreading, the whole world will be much better off.
We have a number of questions. I'm going to ask two rather profound questions and ask you to respond, and then we'll have to wrap this up. This is from Jackson Wolford in Washington. At the personal level, this crisis triggers many people to go and do to help others. But because of the infectious nature of the crisis, that's not a great idea. That risks more harm than help. Internationally, as both government and private organizations, there may be spots of friction where aid can, in fact, become harmful paternalism. In the effort to promote needed relief, how do we pair the urge to go and do with the obligation to wait and listen for what is needed? And then related to that, Dr. Donald McNabb from the U.S. Catholic Mission Association, he points out that our missionaries around the world are serving on the front lines, revealing God's abundant grace. How can we as an international community of faith see and name the sin within ourselves, our systems, our worldview, and call each other to a much deeper and eyes wide open repentance and turn our eyes to the most noble in humanity? So how do we make sure the urge to go and do doesn't turn into paternalism? And secondly, how do we see this pandemic? The Holy Father has talked about this constantly, to see the injustices in the world. One thing is true at home and abroad. Those who suffer discrimination, who are victims of injustice, are disproportionately hurt by both the pandemic, the health crisis, and the economic crisis. How do we look at the systems with new eyes. So how do we listen and learn, and how do we see the structures and act? Cardinal Turkson, can I ask you to
Yes.
open up?
Okay, no, thanks. The temptation to use any situation of need to exploit it and make it, paternalistic or form of this has always been there. There's been a perennial temptation of all NGOs or funding agencies and all, and we have a Carol Relief Service, agency on this interview. There's a constant temptation for this, and I think the one thing that moves us away from this temptation is to recognize the sense of human fraternity, the sense of the human family as brotherly, simply means that when one element in this family suffers, the whole family, as it is now, wholesome. Paul used the analogy of a body. When one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. The sense of the human family, conceived more as a family, is probably one of the things that can help.
Hadi or David, do you want to add? How do we see the structures of sin, and how do we listen and learn as we respond?
I really appreciated, John, the question regarding harmful paternalism. How do we listen and learn and ensure that we're not replicating old structures that really do damage in countries? Catholic Relief Services in every country where we work, we're there first and foremost at the invitation of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church of that country, in this case, the Uganda Episcopal Conference, is our number one partner in Uganda. We, throughout this entire COVID-19 response, have been working hand in hand with them. We actually started on day one when the COVID pandemic, when the first case was announced in Uganda, organizing with the Uganda Catholic Church to have young people in the streets doing education around social distancing and around hand washing. We're partnering with the church now, trying to raise funding so we can provide 10,000 families in Uganda's most vulnerable urban neighborhoods, very overcrowded urban slums. We're trying to partner, we're raising money, we have partnered to be able to provide food and hygiene kits and also hand sanitizer and water to these families. This is what the Catholic Church here in Uganda has asked of us, and that is how we've responded. That's only one or two examples. Everything we've done here really is with our local partners. I always say that CRS is our business model is working hand in hand with the local partners and strengthening local partners, because that is what allows us to really listen to the needs and to ensure that everything we do is as responsive and as relevant and as culturally appropriate to any community where we are. This is also true of the Ugandan government. We are working right now with the Ugandan government to look at the possibility for building isolation centers, because we as CRS Uganda have that capacity. We're also actually have seconded staff. So we have CRS staff who right now are sitting at the Ministry of Health, providing the Ministry of Health with much needed administrative, logistics, coordination support. That's what they've asked of us, and that's what we do. And so I think that closeness is what allows us to be responsive to the true needs.
David, one of the strengths of Bread for the World is it looks at the structures which leave people hungry and poor. How do we take those on?
Well, it's basically public policy. And we can also have some influence on policies of the government of Uganda, other governments around the world, because the United States is a powerful government that influences other governments. But in our country, we do have a democracy, and we've got to make it work. So people who are spiritually grounded, we need to ground ourselves more deeply in the gospel, live out the risen Christ, and part of that is to be active citizens who really go after, who know the structural problems, and also have very specific strategies for changing structures through advocacy.
Thank you. Before I ask you for a closing thought, let me just share a couple things. One, I want to thank our audience for joining us. This is our 5th online dialogue. We didn't know we were doing online dialogues, and now we do them almost weekly. We're not going to keep that up, Anna, I promise. Uh, if you're interested, many of you have probably seen those, but if you're interested, you can go to our website. As I said, it focused on the health pandemic, the economic crisis, young people, Pope Francis. Cardinal Turkson, one thing you would be very interested in, we worked together at a convening on how to share Catholic social teaching in the United States. David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, not a Catholic, ended one of our dialogues by saying the only real intellectual, spiritual framework we have at this moment is Catholic social teaching. And I'll send you his comments. And one of the most interesting things, he said, why is Catholic social teaching Catholic? And he said, because we're a communal social faith. I want to thank Catholic Relief Services, who was our co-sponsor for this entire effort and helped us have Haiti with us. It makes me proud to be a part of this family of faith and hear the work you're doing. Bread for the World has been a partner. The Berkeley Center, Optimum Audio makes this work. AI Media did the closed captioning. Kim Daniels and Anna Misla, they have not been on the screen, but they have made this happen. We have one more we're working on for Latino leaders. We gather young Latino leaders to focus on their particular responsibilities and opportunities. The week of May 25th, we're having a session on faith, family, and community. Latino leaders on faith through the crisis. It ought to be a very interesting discussion. I would ask each of you as you close for just a thought on one sign of hope and one thing each of us can do. And I'll begin with David. One person, the question was, who in Congress should we be talking to if you want that to be? So one sign of hope and one thing each of us can do. David, Hadi, and then the Cardinal.
I think Francis had it right that the sign of hope is the risen Christ. And the most important thing for all of us to do is to open ourselves to the contagion of the Holy Spirit. It's Cardinal Turkson talked about the Spirit as an invisible presence like the virus that is contagious. And if we open ourselves to the contagion of the Holy Spirit, we can embody the risen Christ in this moment. The risen Christ in this moment of great uncertainty and difficulty.
Hadi?
I think David has said it really well. I think that each and every one of us who at this moment is really willing to remember that the poor are counting on us. There are people today who have skipped a meal, who have skipped all their meals. They're not sure where their next bowl of beans or rice or corn is going to come from. And every single one of us that is committed to solidarity, to loving our brothers and sisters as God asks us to being passionate and tireless advocates, I think that is the hope that the world's poor has. And I invite everyone to really heed that call that our faith asks of us as Catholics. And if I might, I really want to end on the Holy Father's words. You pray for the hungry, and then you go out and feed them. This is how prayer works.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Cardinal Turkson?
Yes, I think one other thing that Pope Francis, invites us also not to be forgetful, and essentially forgetful about other crises, other situations. And in this sense, the pandemic is how there's no more kind of eased off from climate crisis and everything. Now, therefore, I just want to finish up by saying that if the invitation is being to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, ironically, but probably, and the very many dying, and especially the identification that minorities and poor, individuals die are most the easiest victims. They have also listened to the cry of the poor. So in the situation we find ourselves in, listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Let us rouse up with a sense of courage and holding on to the hand of God, step into the future.
Thank you very much to all three of you for remarkable closing reflections and a powerful conversation. Cardinal Turkson, for me, the most powerful moment in this terrible time was that image of Pope Francis standing alone in St. Peter's Square, talking about our responsibility, what solidarity requires, what the suffering of Christ meant today, and what the resurrection means for tomorrow. I hope you will tell Pope Francis that he does not stand alone, that we join him in faith, in hope, in love of the Easter promise that David and Hadi and you talked about. Our church is a sacrament. It is a sign of Christ among us. And today we saw that in action. So please tell Pope Francis he does not stand alone. We stand with him.
Amen.
Thank you very much for joining us in this discussion. Please stay safe, stay well, and thank you again for being a part of this conference.
Thank you. Okay, God bless.
Yeah.
Thank you.